We currently have no evidence that he was directed by a foreign terrorist group, but was radicalized domestically. As you can see from the information we provided just a few moments ago, the killer stated that he had an explosive device, but none was found. I also want to point out the heroic actions of not only the first responders, but the victims who were inside the club that morning. They were under the most inconceivable stress, and they bravely assisted law enforcement in bringing it to a resolution. There's no doubt that their actions saved lives. Our investigation into the motives behind the killer and anyone who may have conspired with him or supported him continues. Please also keep in mind that the investigation of the shooting exchange between police and the killer is ongoing. I would point out that some have mistakenly rushed to judgment regarding the actions of these brave men and women. What they did that evening and those early morning hours was nothing less than extraordinary. To give you an idea of the scope of the investigation to date, I want to provide you with a few facts. The Joint Terrorism Task Force has conducted over 500 interviews as we sit here today. 117 vehicles were released to owners and registrants or family members of the victims who were at the Pulse nightclub, and we have approximately 10 left to return. More than 600 pieces of evidence were obtained and processed from the crime scene. We've received thousands of tips based on our appeal to the public, and we ask that you continue to call us at 1-800-CALL-FBI or visit FBI.gov. In closing, I want to advise that we're nearing the conclusion of our processing of the crime scene here outside the Pulse nightclub, and that we hope to restore the area and the outside perimeter to the community within the early part of this week. I want to point out special and extraordinary devotion to the effort here by the Christ Church of Orlando, the Salvation Army, and countless businesses in the Orlando area that have supported law enforcement and our efforts tremendously as their way of paying respect to the victims of this horrendous act. I'd also like to recognize the tremendous efforts of the FBI's evidence response team, who spent the last week processing the most devastating crime scene under circumstances that were very difficult. It's a life-changing experience for all of us, and they've done their duty quietly and among the most noble law enforcement professionals. As I mentioned earlier, this area is expected to be restored to relative normal business early this week, and we do not expect to hold any further press conferences from this location. Thank you. I'd now like to turn it over to Chief John Mina.
Thanks, Ron. Good morning. First, I want to say we appreciate the incredible patience that our community has. We know there are many questions, and people want to know what happened that night. The timeline released based upon radio communications clearly shows our officers were within the club within minutes and engaged the suspect in gunfire. And that's important because that engagement and that initial entry caused him to retreat, stop shooting, and barricade himself in the bathroom with hostages. So it's important to note that this started as an active shooter situation. Our officers took action and then transitioned into a barricade gunman hostage situation. So after that second exchange of gunfire, upon that initial entry of our officers, there was no other gunfire until the hostage rescue operation took place. So during that 3 hours, I just want to make sure everyone's clear on that, there was no gunfire. So during that time, our officers were intermittently in and out of that club, saving people, rescuing people from inside the club. That's another misconception. We were inside the club along with our fellow agency partners. And at some point during, if you see on the timeline, our officers were able to push an air conditioning through to one of the dressing rooms, and I believe saved 8 people out of that room. So I'm extremely proud of the heroic actions of our officers, and I am very confident they saved many, many, many lives that night. We continue to concentrate on the security of the crime scene, and eventually we'll open up roadways and businesses, but we ask that people please be patient with us on that. We're also concentrating on the many vigils and events and providing security for everyone and making sure everyone feels safe as well. And also our top priority at the City of Orlando is making sure our residents are safe and the reduction of crime. Again, I want to thank everyone for their patience as we go through this process. And I also want to thank the community for the huge outpouring of support for our local law enforcement who did a tremendous job in this situation. I'm going to turn it over to Orange County Sheriff Jerry Demings at this time.
Thank you, Chief. Good morning. You now heard about the timeline of events during the early morning hours of June the 12th. As you heard, that this has been a collaborative effort from the very beginning. I must say that the response of the Orlando Police Department and those initial responding law enforcement officers has been nothing less than short of being extraordinary. One of the reasons why the response was extraordinary is really because of the overall preparedness to deal with an incident like this. Prior to this crisis, our federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies have been preparing for this event. In fact, for years now, we have prepared to respond to a terror event. In recent months, our agencies have been involved in training our personnel to be able to rapidly respond to an active shooter incident. In terms of our overall preparedness, I want to talk a little bit about our partnership with the Department of Homeland Security. In September of 2014, in fact, on September the 9th and September the 10th, we participated in a joint counterterrorism exercise that was held here in Orlando at the Orange County Convention Center. That exercise was designed to prepare us to respond to an active shooter situation involving mass casualties. On October the 28th of 2014, Department of Homeland Security Undersecretary General Francis Taylor visited our Central Florida Intelligence Exchange, which we refer to as our Fusion Center here locally. This is a tremendous asset to our region because our Fusion Center, the Central Florida Intelligence Exchange, has our federal, state, and local law enforcement partners who work daily regarding counterterrorism efforts in this community. During the events of June the 12th, the CFIX activated and was successful in disseminating substantial information to our law enforcement partners here within our region as well as across our nation. The Fusion Center has continued to be and play a vital role in the effort since that time. They have been involved in providing daily updates and situation reports to law enforcement partners. They've also provided daily counterterrorism reports and working with the FBI in this investigation. Their efforts will continue on a day-to-day basis. I will share with you that in this community, the citizens who live here should be confident by knowing that you have competent law enforcement authorities who are able to respond rapidly to any situation that we will be confronted with in the future. However, there are daily efforts to prevent a similar attack from occurring. That will be based solely on the collaboration between, again, our federal, state, and local law enforcement authorities. Let me move on now and talk just briefly about the first responders. Chief Mena mentioned the heroic acts of those first responders. We want to make certain that at this point, we do take care of our personnel, because on that day, they saw some very horrific things, and our goal is moving forward to ensure that they are provided with the diffusion as well as counseling sessions to ensure that to what extent we can minimize any PTSD type effects on them into the future. Again, I'm going to conclude by saying that our community remains a safe community, and we certainly support people coming in and visiting our community. It is a vibrant community, a resilient community, And much of what you have seen in the last few days and hours has been a reminder that this community is still here and willing and working together to make this a safe place for our families and our visitors here. Thank you so much.
Now we'll take questions.
Could you clarify something in the timeline? You say that there was no shooting after done in the half,
There was no shooting for that 3-hour period until the commencement of the hostage rescue operation. Well, during that time, we were ensuring that our explosive entry team had set the charge and everyone was ready for an explosive entry. So that does take time.
Administration Hopper, at your last update, you asked the public for help trying to figure out the most complete picture of the shooter and why he did it. These transcripts show he told you why he did it. He did it for the Islamic State. What good does it do to redacting all of it?
Part of the redacting is meant to not give credence to individuals who have done terrorist acts in the past. We're not going to propagate their rhetoric, their violent rhetoric, and we see no value in putting those individuals' names back out there. We're trying to prevent future acts from happening again, and for cowards like this one, people like that influence them, so we're not going to continue to put their names out front.
Mr. Hopper redacted a lot of redacted things from transcripts in many investigations.
I'm not familiar with the other investigations you may be referring to, but for this one, we think it's highly important.
Mr. Hopper, that said 3 hours. That said 3 hours. There were shots fired at 2:08. Exchange between the shooter and the police officers that responded, and then there were shots fired at 5:14 after the breach of the wall. During those two instances of gunfire, were there any casualties?
Repeat your question.
Outside of the 3 hours, where there's no gunfire in the club, at 2:04, when there was initial exchange with the backup officers inside the club, and at 5:14 after the breach of the wall, the file gunfire that killed the shooter, were there any casualties that resulted from that gunfire besides the shooter?
That's all part of the investigation. All of that is being reconstructed at this time. I don't understand what you're saying.
Well, it sounds like you're responding to criticism of the response. It sounds like there's something very specific that you're addressing. I'd like to know what that is.
Oh, absolutely. We received many comments from the press and from the public, some emails about. I think there was this misconception that we didn't do anything for 3 hours, and I'm just trying to clarify that's absolutely not true. Our officers were in the club within minutes, exchanged gunfire with the suspect, forced him to stop shooting and retreat into the bathroom. From there, we let our negotiator take over and try and negotiate this to a peaceful resolution in an effort to save lives while our SWAT team set up. So that's the issue for the clarification.
Was there any actual negotiations with the gunman to help us understand?
Was there what?
Was there any actual negotiations back and forth with the gunman?
Some of that was released. Yes. Some of that was released earlier. Yes, there was. Our negotiator was talking with him.
Chief, how likely is it that some of the victims may have been shot and killed by police gunfire in the initial attempt to save lives?
That's all part of the investigation, but here's what I will tell you. Those killings are on the suspect, and on the suspect alone, in my mind. All that will be investigated by our officers, acted heroically, and did as they were trained in an unbelievable circumstances, and did a phenomenal job. What's that? Well, the question was, how difficult was it for me to make that decision? And I will tell you, just as the sheriff said, we have been training for this situation for many, many years, since Columbine, since 9/11. I knew our officers were ready. I knew our SWAT team members were ready. I knew our hospitals were ready. And yes, it's a very difficult decision to make, but it was the right decision at the right time, and I stand by that, and we make the same decision standing here today.
Mr. Hopper, other than setting the victim's 911 calls aside, the redactions obviously will invite controversy and questions. Why would you want to redact anything in what came out of the shooter's mouth? Why not just let it speak for itself and then bring the analysis in on the back end?
So I've already addressed that question. We're not going to propagate violent rhetoric that comes from other people, whether they be here or overseas. And to do that would only inflame other people here that might be like-minded. So there's no purpose in doing that.
Other attacks on the Orlando area within the following days. At what point in time did you credit those maybe some of the attacks and how was that handled?
That's an excellent question. So immediately upon dealing with this situation, we had an intelligence component directed specifically at determining whether or not other threats existed to this area as well as throughout the United States nationally. I can't tell you that there's a specific finite time when we said, okay, everything is fine, the coast is clear. In fact, we continue to do that to this day. That's the reason the Joint Terrorism Task Force exists, as well as the partnerships with our state and local partners and CFIX. We do that second by second, minute by minute, daily. And so we continue to do that.
In the negotiations, we're trying to keep them talking to get in and save people in this room those moments, those realities.
Absolutely. Anytime we can engage a suspect who's in a hostage situation, we definitely want to keep them talking, not only to peacefully resolve the situation and cause less life to be lost, but also to set up and make sure our teams are ready to enter, yes. There was never a concern that he was going to get away. We were going to take him into custody.
Do you have any evidence
You
that
sent the call out
was anything but
You sent the call out for the SWAT team about 2 or 3 working timely. How soon was the SWAT team able to assemble here? Why did they go in before say around 3 o'clock? It looks like on the timeline gunman first mentioned anything about bombs.
Well, like I said, our SWAT team responded and set up for all situations. And part of that, I'm not going to go into all of our tactics, but I will say, it takes time to set up explosives and do an explosive entry. Those things take time.
You guys are saying that all of the witnesses that were inside the club during those 3 hours, can you talk about the information that they may have given you officers to help them?
Absolutely. Those calls were very vital, and that's how we received the information about the explosives. So very vital to receive that information from people inside of the club.
Do you have evidence that the motive would have been anything other than radical Islamic terror? As you look through things about his life, even with his family, things that he's done, would you have any reason to think that they could have gone into attack for any reason other than acting as an Islamic fighter?
Yes, absolutely. We're actually looking into any potential motive. We're not limiting ourselves to coming up with just one motive. We're looking at a myriad of things right now, and that actually is ongoing as we speak, both through social media, friend contacts, people that had only met the individual for one time. And that's why we're asking for anybody and everybody that's had any contact with this individual to come forward so we can piece that information together for potential other motives as well. Those allegations are still being vetted out as we speak, and there's no determination been made at this time.
I wonder if your officers, when the actual shooting was happening, were able to access that video and watch the movements of the shooter inside the club.
No, I can't talk about any video. That's all part of the investigation. Shin, did you have a question? No, I can't talk about that at this time. Last question. we can't comment on that. Thank you very much.
For help, it's actually provide a breakdown of what before you arrived in Orlando.
We're answering no further questions, but I would like to respond very briefly to a question that was asked earlier about whether redacting these transcripts was consistent with state law. I'd like to tell you all that we consulted with our state partners. The release of these transcripts complies with state law. In fact, the city of Orlando, led by Mayor Buddy Dyer, and the Orlando Police Department, led by Chief Mina, wanted to release as much as possible with respect to these early morning hours. All of this is subject to a federal investigation. The Attorney General decided upon this limited release. They are not in any way trying to hide anything. They're trying to be as forthcoming as possible. We've got no further questions, no further answers right now. Thank you.
Heads up. You're standing. Hold on. Watch your foot. Alex, nice to see you. It's great to see you. How long are you here for? That's a good question.
Sorry, we're going
Hey, we got to.
call it first. Your name.
Okay. What camera are we on? Okay.
Camera.